LoreWarrior Campaign, 4th Succession War, Changing Politics. The first half of the 4th Succession War made significant changes in the political alignment of the Inner Sphere. Not only did dozens of worlds change hands along several borders, but there were also several more important changes affecting the political movers and shakers of the region. Nowhere were these changes so numerous and so fundamental as along that of the Davian-Lao border. The Tikonov Free Republic. One of the objectives of Operation Rat was to separate Chancellor Lao from Colonel Pavel Ridzik, his military strategist. It was mostly through the influence of Colonel Ridzik that the Capellan military, which was a hodgepodge of different warrior houses, parent organizations, and mercenary units, was held together in the past. Colonel Ridzik's level-headedness had tempered the Chancellor's more outrageous military schemes on several occasions. Prince Davian had hoped to force Ridzik from the Chancellor's side to defeat the Capellan Confederation more easily. The planet Tikonov was key to this plan. Though Pavel Ridzik was born on High Spire, he considered Tikonov to be his homeworld because he'd spent so much of his time among the many willing women of Tikograd's red light districts during his cadet years. The AFFS believed that Colonel Ridzik would defend the world himself for personal reasons and because of Tikonov's importance as the site of the Confederation's major battle mech factory. The Davian strategist had planned well, for Colonel Ridzik did in fact personally coordinate the defence of Tikonov. The Tikonov campaign was one of the AFFS's greatest success stories and one of its greatest disappointments. The planet was captured with its industry intact, but Pavel Ridzik would escape. AFFS intelligence units tracked Colonel Ridzik to Elgin, where he would resume his defence of the commonality. Agents would also discover that Chancellor Lao no longer held the colonel in such high esteem. He apparently believed that Ridzik was about to surrender the entire commonality and strike a deal with the Federated Sons to make him the ruler of the Tikonov state. Prince Hansa Davian came to two conclusions. One was that if the Chancellor did believe Colonel Ridzik may defect, then perhaps he would. The second was that Ridzik's life was in immediate danger. Prince Davian knew that, in the past, even the slightest hint of treason had prompted Chancellor Lao to order a person to be executed or assassinated. Davian didn't intend for this to happen, and so he ordered his agents on Elgin to protect the colonel. Davian agents learned that the colonel was to be dining with a rather beautiful woman at the Golden Kirin, a posh restaurant in Sochaladan, the capital city of Elgin. Through a chance encounter with a sympathetic member of an Elgin Hollow news station, they also found out that the woman was one of the more notorious assassins in the Maskirovka, the Capellan Secret Service. Using one of their many contacts, the Davian spies obtained reservations at the Golden Kirin. Seated a few tables away from the colonel, a Davian agent saw the assassin rise from the table, leaving behind her large sequined purse. He signalled his partners waiting in the restaurant's alcove, who would then call Colonel Ridzik away on business, and then the agents would hustle him away just before the explosion destroyed the entire building. Because of the devastating force of the explosion, forensic experts couldn't identify the bodies, leaving Capellan officials to readily assume that Colonel Ridzik was dead. This made it easy then for Davian agents to spirit him away from Elgin. Colonel Ridzik was taken to a merchant dropship, which would then take him aboard a jump ship that was bound for Terra. There he was transferred to another ship that was bound for New Avalon, and a meeting with Prince Hansa Davian. Lieutenant General Arden Sortek greeted the colonel when he arrived on New Avalon on the 24th of February. The prince's aide laid out the conditions under which the Federated Sons would recognize Colonel Ridzik as the new leader of the Tikonov commonality. The most difficult thing for the colonel to accept was that he would renounce any claim to Tikonov worlds that the AFFS had already taken. Ridzik balked at this idea because it meant that Tikonov, by far the most important world, would be outside of his control. The second condition was that the colonel has to allow jump ships travelling between the Federated Sons and the Lyran Commonwealth free passage throughout this realm, and the third condition was that he used the forces now under his new state to attack the Free World League. Colonel Ridzik agreed to the conditions, but he had several counter ones of his own that he wanted to enact. The first was that he wanted help ridding his worlds of any Lao sympathizers. He also sought military supplies from the Federated Sons, or the money to buy them from the Lyran Commonwealth, and the third was that the prince recognized his realm as an equal, not as a vassal state. In the name of Prince Davian, General Sortek agreed. The meeting between the prince and the colonel was relatively short. Each knew what the other wanted and expected, and it only remained to haggle over the particulars. The negotiations came to a halt, however, when Davian suggested that Colonel Ridzik hire an officer from the Federated Sons' Ministry of Intelligence, Investigations and Operations to act as his aide and liaison with Davian. Ridzik took this suggestion to mean that the prince now wanted to appoint a watchdog over him. Colonel Ridzik first flatly refused the suggestion, but would agree to General Sortek being his aide. And with that, the two men signed the Tikonov Free Republic document of recognition. Prince Davian announced his recognition of the Tikonov Free Republic at a press conference on the 3rd of March, 3029. The Lyran Commonwealth joined the Federated Sons in their recognition of this free republic and quickly sent an ambassador and a high-level trade official to pave the way for what the Archon called a strong economic link between our two realms. Comstar would follow suit, expressing the hope that the new state would be free as its name proclaimed it to be. And when Colonel Ridzik stepped out of the dropship at the Sochaladan spaceport in Elgin, he was astounded by the huge crowd now gathered to welcome him as their new leader. Though most people in the Tikonov Free Republic's 19 inhabited systems readily accepted the new order, on some worlds Lao officials refused to give loyalty oaths to Ridzik. These men and women were purged, often quite violently. Colonel Ridzik would soon declare himself Supreme Lord of the Tikonov Free Republic and dissolved most of the old governmental structure. In its place, he appointed friends, relatives, and his many illegitimate children to governmental posts. The new government was to be a monarchy with just enough hint of freedom to satisfy the Federated Sons and the Lyran Commonwealth. For an entire month, the Supreme Lord of the Republic lived as the king he had proclaimed himself to be. Like a child with a new toy, he delighted in using his power, taking special pleasure in settling old debts with men and women who had once slighted him. Another favourite pastime was to see him send taunting messages to the Chancellor himself. Supreme Lord Ridzik became bored, though, with his petty pursuits by mid-April, about the same time as he was becoming overwhelmed at trying to run all facets of a state. General Sortek's suggestion that Ridzik should begin planning the military offensive he'd promised the prince freed Tikonov's new ruler to turn happily to the more familiar world of military affairs. The Tikonov Free Republic army was a small but rather powerful one. Because so many mech regiments had been destroyed when Davian forces invaded the region, Lord Ridzik now wielded only about 3 mech regiments. By gathering together survivors of these destroyed Capellan regiments and recruiting cadets from the Republic's mech warrior academies, he created the 4th and 5th Republican battle mech regiments. Armour, infantry and aerospace fighters would form the bulk of the new TFRA, and Colonel Ridzik inherited 18 armoured regiments and twice that number in infantry.